Hey guys, welcome back. Tonight we descend beneath the quiet villages of Cappadocia and uncover a hidden world that should not exist. An underground city 85 meters deep, carved by ancient hands into volcanic rock, large enough to shelter 20,000 souls in total darkness. This is the story of Derinkuyu, the deepest underground city ever discovered, a place where generations were born, prayed, pressed wine, raised children, and survived wars without seeing the sky. In this episode of History for Sleep, we explore the Derinkuyu Paradox. What terrified ancient humans enough to build an entire nation beneath the earth, and why that darkness may have felt safer than sunlight. From secret tunnels found in a basement in 1963 to ancient engineering that defies logic, from underground churches and rolling stone doors to the psychology of shelter and our deep cave instinct, this calming history documentary will guide you through volcanic rock architecture, ancient civilizations' timelines, and the quiet resilience that shaped human survival. This is not just a story about fear, it is a story about continuity, human resilience, and the strange comfort of enclosed spaces that still soothes us today. So before you get comfortable, take a gentle moment to like this video and subscribe, but only if these deep sleep history stories help you find peace, sleep better, or simply reflect on our shared journey through time. Now, close your eyes, take a slow breath, and imagine a single wall breaking open to reveal a forgotten world beneath your feet. Imagine you break a wall in your own home and discover a doorway into a world that has been lost for 2,000 years. In 1963, in the quiet region of Cappadocia in central Turkey, a man was doing something utterly ordinary. He was renovating his basement. The house had grown too small for his family, and like many practical homeowners, he decided to knock down a wall to create more space. The air was thick with chalky dust, stone fragments scattered across the floor. The sound of hammers striking masonry echoed in the confined room. Then the wall gave way. But instead of revealing another modest storage space, the collapse opened into darkness. Not the shallow darkness of a cupboard, not the tight crawl space behind bricks. It was a hollow void, cool and breathing faintly like the exhale of something ancient. He shone a flashlight into the opening. The beam cut through suspended dust and landed on a tunnel descending into shadow. This was the moment that would become the Derinkuyu discovery, one of the most astonishing accidental finds in modern archaeology. A secret tunnel found in a basement, a private home hiding an entrance to an underground city vast enough to shelter 20,000 people. Tonight, as part of our History for Sleep journey, we begin not with emperors or battles, but with a single blow of a hammer and a small hole in a wall. The man did not yet know that beneath his feet lay 18 levels carved into volcanic rock. He did not know about the rolling stone doors designed to seal entire communities inside. He did not know about ventilation shafts dropping nearly 280 feet into the earth, bringing fresh air to families who once lived in total darkness. All he saw was an opening. And sometimes history begins with nothing more than curiosity and a draft of cool air brushing against your face. Imagine the silence of that basement after the dust settled, the way sound changes when a hidden chamber absorbs it, the faint whisper of wind rising from below, as if the earth itself were inhaling. For centuries, Derinkuyu had slept beneath fields and homes, beneath kitchens and children's laughter. Generations had walked above it without knowing. Entire neighborhoods had grown and vanished while the underground city remained intact, patient, and unseen. What terrifies ancient humans enough to carve a city underground? War? Invasion? Religious persecution? Natural catastrophe? The paradox of Derinkuyu is not only its scale, but its intention. People do not remove 2.5 million cubic feet of stone without reason. They do not design livestock stalls, churches, wells, and kitchens underground unless the surface world feels profoundly unsafe. Yet this discovery did not begin with fear. It began with renovation, with domestic inconvenience, with the universal human desire to make space for one's family. And that is the viral serendipity of this story. Any one of us, moving a shelf, breaking a wall, digging a garden, could stumble into something extraordinary. History is not always found in deserts or royal tombs. Sometimes it waits behind plaster and paint. The man called local authorities. Archaeologists arrived. What they uncovered beneath that modest Turkish home would challenge assumptions about ancient engineering, survival psychology, and communal resilience. But before we descend into the deeper levels, stay with this image. A flashlight beam trembling slightly in a human hand, a rough-edged hole in a brick wall, the quiet inhale of underground air. This is how lost worlds return, slowly, unexpectedly, with a knock in the dark. And as you listen tonight, allow the story to unfold gently, layer by layer, as though you too are brushing dust from stone, discovering not only tunnels beneath the earth, but something enduring about human nature itself. So the authorities did not expect much at first. A curious cavity behind a basement wall could have been an old storage chamber, perhaps a forgotten cellar from an earlier structure. But as investigators widened the opening, the tunnel extended farther than anyone anticipated. It did not end after a few meters. It sloped downward with intention, walls smoothed by deliberate carving, not random erosion. The air was cool but breathable, circulating gently as though guided. This was no accident of geology, this was design. And as more passages were cleared, the scale began to reveal itself. Rooms opened from corridors, narrow stairways spiraled deeper. Stone doors, perfectly round and weighing hundreds of pounds, stood ready to roll into place and seal entire sections from intruders. The Derinkuyu discovery was no longer a curiosity, it was a revelation. A secret tunnel found in a basement that led to an underground city of astonishing complexity. Imagine descending step by careful step. The light grows dimmer, the ceiling lowers slightly, carved precisely to conserve effort, yet high enough for movement. You begin to sense that this place was built not for moments, but for months. Not for hiding briefly, but for surviving systematically. Storage rooms large enough for grain reserves, presses for wine and oil, communal kitchens, wells reaching groundwater that could not be poisoned from the surface, even chapels carved into stone where quiet prayers once echoed against rock walls. This was not chaos carved in panic, it was infrastructure shaped by foresight. And yet the paradox deepens. What kind of terror requires 18 levels of refuge? Cappadocia was no stranger to conflict. Empires rose and fell across Anatolia. Persian forces, Greek armies, Roman authority, Arab incursions, Mongol expansion. Each century brought uncertainty. For early Christian communities especially, waves of persecution made concealment essential. But Derinkuyu predates some of these eras. Portions may reach back to the Phrygians, perhaps even earlier. which means the impulse to go underground was not isolated to one moment of crisis. It was inherited, refined, expanded across generations. This is where the story becomes more than archaeology. It becomes psychological. When the surface world feels fragile, humans seek shelter. Sometimes that shelter is symbolic, sometimes it is literal. In Derinkuyu, it was both. The earth became fortress and womb at once, a place of defense and of continuity. The deeper archaeologists explored, the clearer the intention became. Ventilation shafts connected multiple levels, allowing fresh air to travel nearly 280 feet downward. This engineering miracle was not improvisation. It required mathematical awareness of airflow, structural stability, and communal planning. People were not simply reacting to fear, they were organizing against it. And that is perhaps the most profound element of this history for Sleep Journey. Fear alone does not build cities. Cooperation does, vision does, discipline does. As the excavation continued, scholars realized that Derinkuyu was not alone. Dozens of underground cities dot Cappadocia, some interconnected through miles of tunnels, entire subterranean networks invisible from above. The surface may have seemed peaceful at times, but beneath it lay contingency plans carved in stone. What terrifies ancient humans enough to build this? The answer may not be a single invader or a single war. It may be the memory of instability itself, a cultural understanding that safety is temporary and preparation is survival. Imagine families descending with livestock, tools, sacred texts, and children. The heavy stone door rolled shut, darkness thick but not suffocating. Oil lamps flicker. Murmured voices filled chambers designed to hold sound gently. Life continuing below while danger passes above. It is humbling to realize that for centuries, this entire world remained hidden until a man renovating his basement struck a wall. Serendipity revealed what fear had concealed. And now, as you rest and listen, consider how many forgotten architectures may still lie beneath modern cities, beneath ordinary homes, beneath places we assume are fully known. The knock in the dark was not only a physical act, it was symbolic, a reminder that history is layered, that beneath comfort may lie resilience, beneath routine may lie survival stories etched into stone. And as this chapter closes, let the image settle softly in your mind. A beam of light entering ancient corridors, dust rising slowly in golden particles, the quiet patience of carved rock waiting centuries to be seen again. Derinkuyu does not shout its story, it whispers, and in that whisper we begin to understand that what ancient humans feared was not merely invasion, but impermanence itself. This was not a cave. This was an underground Manhattan of the ancient world. As archaeologists continued mapping the descending corridors beneath Derinkuyu, the true scale of what had been hidden in darkness began to unfold in a way that felt almost impossible to accept. 85 meters deep, nearly 280 feet. Imagine taking an 18-story building and turning it upside down beneath the soil, each floor carved carefully into volcanic rock, each level connected through narrow passageways designed to be defensible, functional, and enduring. The phrase 24th deepest underground city is not exaggeration. Derinkuyu remains one of the most profound examples of vertical survival architecture ever discovered. But numbers alone do not carry weight until we feel them. Stand in your mind at the edge of an 18-story drop. Now imagine that instead of glass windows and steel beams, the walls are stone shaped by human hands using primitive tools. No electric drills, no reinforced concrete, no modern scaffolding, only chisels, hammers, fire-setting techniques, patience, and collective will. And yet, level after level was hollowed out with intention. The Derinkuyu capacity is estimated at 20,000 people, and that figure includes livestock. 20,000 souls descending together into the earth during times of danger, bringing with them sheep, goats, food reserves, tools, faith, and memory. This was not temporary panic shelter, this was structured continuity. Think about what 20,000 people represent in the ancient world. That is not a village, that is a city. That is an organized population large enough to require food storage systems, waste management, water distribution, air circulation, social order. And beneath Cappadocia's surface, all of this existed. Ancient engineering here was not ornamental, it was existential. Grain rooms were carved large enough to sustain months of isolation. Communal spaces allowed for cooking and gathering. Wells were positioned strategically so that access to fresh water could not be cut off from above. The depth itself became protection. The deeper you go, the harder it becomes for invaders to breach without knowing the labyrinth. The architecture was defensive in its subtlety. Narrow corridors forced intruders to move single file. Rolling stone doors could seal entire sectors. Vertical shafts provided ventilation, but also acted as communication channels between levels. This was survival designed in 3 dimensions. And as we consider this history for Sleep Journey, allow yourself to feel the quiet awe rather than the urgency. There is something profoundly human about this scale of preparation. Fear, yes, but also planning. Imagine a generation beginning to carve the first chambers, then their children expanding further, then grandchildren deepening the system, learning from previous conflicts, refining air shafts, strengthening doors, improving storage layouts. The underground city was not born in a single decade, it was layered across time, just as our own cities grow upward in glass and steel. Here, growth moved downward. The paradox remains. What terrified ancient humans enough to build this? Perhaps not one catastrophe, but repeated instability. Perhaps the memory of raids, the echo of hooves, the smoke on distant horizons. When danger becomes cyclical, architecture adapts. And so Derinkuyu expanded, not recklessly, but deliberately. The volcanic rock of Cappadocia, soft when freshly exposed and hardening upon contact with air, offered a rare geological advantage. This allowed ancient engineering to flourish in ways that seem miraculous even now. But geology alone does not explain scale. Collective coordination does. The discipline to carve downward without collapsing structural integrity does. The willingness to invest labor for threats that may or may not arrive does. As modern listeners, accustomed to skyscrapers and subways, we may underestimate how radical this was. Yet imagine building a fully functioning vertical city without machinery, guided only by instinct, geometry, and necessity. That is the true scale of fear. Not hysteria, but organized foresight. And as you rest with this image, picture torches flickering against stone walls 85 meters below ground, families settling into chambers carved by ancestors, the surface world silent above, the earth holding them not as prisoners, but as protectors. This was not merely refuge, it was resilience carved in stone.
And yet, even after we accept the depth, even after we acknowledge the Derinkuyu capacity of 20,000 people, the mind still struggles to comprehend the lived reality of such magnitude, because scale is not only about numbers, it is about coordination. Imagine 20,000 individuals moving downward in controlled waves, not in chaos, but in rhythm. The elderly guided carefully, children held close, livestock herded through narrow stone corridors, grain sacks lowered level by level, oil lamps protected from drafts. This was not a desperate stampede into darkness. It was an organized descent, rehearsed perhaps across generations. If Derinkuyu was the 24th deepest underground city, then it was also one of the most disciplined. The architecture reveals intention in every carved angle. Ceilings were measured to preserve strength. Support pillars were left precisely where structural stress demanded them. Ventilation shafts aligned vertically like invisible spines, allowing oxygen to circulate through chambers 85 meters below the surface. This is ancient engineering not as spectacle, but as silent mastery. Consider the mathematics involved, without formalized textbooks, the intuitive understanding of weight distribution, the decision to carve sideways before carving deeper, the restraint required to stop excavating before weakening the rock. Each level reflects accumulated knowledge, trial and refinement, correction and patience. There is something profoundly humbling about that. We often imagine ancient societies as reactive, primitive, overwhelmed by forces beyond their control. And yet, Derinkuyu suggests something different. It suggests strategic foresight. It suggests that fear, when processed collectively rather than individually, can become architecture. The scale of fear here is not loud. It does not scream. It organizes. And perhaps that is why this underground Manhattan feels so modern in spirit. Modern cities are contingency plans against vulnerability. They centralize resources, they coordinate systems, they prepare for disruption. Derinkuyu did the same, only inverted into the earth. Think about time spent underground, weeks, perhaps months. 20,000 people cannot survive without structure. There would have been routines, assigned spaces, rotations for water access, designated cooking areas, quiet corners for prayer, storage rooms carefully rationed, waste removed systematically to prevent contamination. The deeper one goes, the more evident it becomes that this was not simply refuge, it was an alternative world prepared in parallel with the surface. When invasions passed, life would slowly rise upward again. When rumors of conflict returned, the descent would repeat. Generations learning pathways by memory, children growing familiar with corridors as if they were streets. The surface may have been uncertain, but below there was predictability carved in stone. And here lies the viral paradox. With the most basic tools available in their era, these communities achieved something that even modern engineers would hesitate to attempt without heavy machinery. They removed millions of cubic feet of rock with minimal collapse. They created ventilation systems rivaling contemporary underground infrastructure. They designed defensive choke points that still impress military historians. The phrase ancient engineering does not fully capture it. This was adaptive intelligence under pressure. As we continue this history for sleep reflection, allow your breathing to slow as you imagine standing at the midpoint of this inverted skyscraper. Above you, 9 levels. Below you, 9 more. The air cool but circulating. The walls steady. Somewhere, faintly, the murmur of distant voices. Not panic, presence. The scale of fear becomes something else entirely when you witness its outcome. It becomes preparation. It becomes unity. And perhaps what ancient humans feared most was not death itself, but displacement, the sudden loss of community, the destruction of continuity. Derinkuyu was insurance against erasure, a city ready to disappear without being destroyed. And when we consider the Derinkuyu discoveries centuries later, uncovered by chance behind a basement wall, we are reminded of how quietly resilience can persist. Entire civilizations may seem to vanish from history, but sometimes they are simply waiting beneath our feet. The knock in the dark opened a doorway. The scale revealed a mindset. And as this chapter settles, let the image remain with you gently.
An 18-story silence carved downward into earth, 20,000 heartbeats once synchronized in hidden chambers, the world above uncertain, the world below prepared. That is the true scale of fear, not hysteria, but architecture, not collapse, but construction. How did ancient farmers become master structural engineers without computers? As we descend deeper into Derinkuyu, beyond its astonishing scale and capacity, we encounter something even more quietly extraordinary. The city was not carved from random stone. It was shaped from tuff, a soft volcanic rock formed by ancient eruptions across Cappadocia. At first glance, that may sound like fortune, but geological generosity alone does not explain precision. Removing an estimated 2.5 million cubic feet of rock without collapsing the ceiling above you is not luck. It is calculation disguised as instinct. This is where 3/8 volcanic rock architecture becomes more than a phrase. It becomes a meditation on human adaptation. Cappadocia geology gifted its inhabitants with a material that is soft when freshly exposed and gradually hardens when in contact with air. That characteristic made carving possible, but possibility is not mastery. The rock could still fracture unpredictably. A ceiling carved too thin would crack. A pillar placed too narrowly would fail under stress. Each tunnel required an understanding of weight distribution that feels astonishing even now. There were no architectural blueprints on parchment, no digital modeling, no reinforced steel beams to correct mistakes. There were only hands, chisels, and experience passed from elder to apprentice. Ancient construction methods here were not theoretical, they were empirical. A strike of the hammer revealed resistance. The echo of the chisel indicated thickness. The vibration beneath one's palm signaled whether a wall was too thin. Knowledge was sensory, measured not in numbers, but in sound and feel. And yet the outcome rivals modern subterranean engineering. Imagine carving a chamber large enough for communal gatherings. You must leave enough material above to support multiple levels, yet remove enough stone to allow air and light from oil lamps to circulate. Remove too much, and gravity wins. Remove too little, and survival becomes suffocating. Somewhere in those dim corridors, generations of builders learned to read the stone as if it were a language. This is why the phrase "lost technology" lingers in the mind. Not because advanced machines once existed, but because the intuitive literacy of materials has faded in modern times. We outsource calculation to algorithms. They listened to rock. Cappadocia geology offered opportunity, but human patience shaped it into permanence. The softness of tuff when first cut allowed for relatively swift excavation compared to granite or limestone. But as oxygen hardened the exposed surfaces, the city's walls strengthened naturally. This interplay between environment and intention reveals a quiet brilliance. Builders could carve quickly, knowing the structure would solidify over time. It was architecture that matured like clay fired in open air. Consider the coordination required. Excavated stone had to be removed through narrow shafts. Dust had to be managed to avoid suffocation. Work likely occurred in stages, carving outward and downward in sequences that maintained stability. Pillars were left intentionally where pressure concentrated. Arched ceilings distributed weight evenly. Ventilation shafts doubled as structural spines. Each decision prevented collapse, not by accident, but by accumulated wisdom. As you listen tonight in this History for Sleep reflection, allow yourself to imagine the rhythm of those ancient construction methods, the steady tap of metal against stone, the pause to listen, the correction of angle, the dust drifting downward in quiet spirals. This was labor measured in years,
perhaps decades, not rushed, not reckless. The impossibility of stone was answered not with force, but with patience. And perhaps that is the deeper paradox of Derinkuyu. The same people who cultivated fields above ground also cultivated voids below. Farmers by day, engineers by necessity. Their tools were simple, yet their understanding of material behavior rivals modern insight. The city did not collapse because they understood limits. They carved to the edge of what was safe and then stopped. And in that restraint lies the true genius.
And the deeper we reflect on this impossibility of stone, the more the mystery shifts from what they built to how they knew when to stop. Because in any underground structure, collapse is not dramatic at first. It begins with a hairline fracture, a faint shift in pressure, a ceiling that sounds slightly different when struck. To carve 2.5 million cubic feet of volcanic tuff and leave it standing for centuries requires not only courage, but restraint. Cappadocia geology provided opportunity, yes, but opportunity without discipline becomes ruin. The builders of Derinkuyu seem to understand something profoundly subtle about volcanic rock architecture. They worked with the grain of the stone, not against it. They followed natural layers formed by ancient eruptions. They left thicker ceilings where the rock showed signs of weakness. They shaped arches instead of flat slabs to distribute weight evenly. These are principles modern engineers learn through equations. They learned them through observation. Ancient construction methods in Derinkuyu were almost meditative. One does not rush beneath 85 meters of earth. One listens. One senses the density through vibration. One studies the color variation of tuff, which can indicate strength or brittleness. Some sections of the city show evidence of fire setting techniques, where heat was applied to soften stone before chiseling. Even that required calculation. Too much heat and the rock fractures unpredictably. Too little and the effort is wasted. There's a quiet intelligence embedded in these walls. Not loud, not boastful, but enduring. This is why the idea of lost technology lingers, not because of alien speculation or mythical machinery, but because we have lost intimacy with material. Today, we pour concrete and trust formulas. They carved stone and trusted touch. In Derinkuyu, pillars are not symmetrical decorations, they are survival decisions. Ventilation shafts are not simply airways, they are structural anchors, stabilizing vertical stress across multiple levels. Each corridor curves slightly, not randomly, but to avoid long linear weaknesses. Each chamber maintains proportion that balances openness with safety. Volcanic rock architecture here is dialogue between human intention and geological memory. Cappadocia geology formed the canvas millions of years ago through ash and lava flows. Human hands returned centuries later to sculpt space within it. The result is not brute excavation, it is negotiation with stone. Imagine the weight above you as you carve. Tons upon tons of earth pressing downward. The psychological dimension of that pressure alone is immense. To descend further, knowing gravity waits patiently above, demands trust in your craft. And yet, they continued downward, level after level, not recklessly, but incrementally. Test a section, observe for cracks, reinforce with pillars, continue. Ancient construction methods were iterative long before the term existed. Knowledge accumulated through memory rather than textbooks. Perhaps a collapsed chamber once taught them caution. Perhaps a narrow tunnel reinforced at the last moment became a lesson passed down orally. We will never know every mistake they made, but we know the final result stands. As we continue this history for sleep meditation, imagine standing inside one of these chambers in silence. Run your fingers along the wall. Feel the slight unevenness of hand carving. Notice how the ceiling curves just enough to carry weight outward rather than downward. There is something deeply calming about the geometry of safety. Fear initiated the project, but understanding sustained it. And here lies the paradox once more. What terrified ancient humans enough to build this? Not only enemies, but uncertainty. Not only invasion, but unpredictability. Stone became certainty. Architecture became reassurance. By mastering volcanic tuff, they mastered anxiety. By shaping space beneath Earth, they shaped continuity above it. And perhaps what feels most impossible is not the volume of rock removed, but the patience embedded in every centimeter. Millions of cubic feet carved without modern measurement tools, yet balanced with precision. That is not miracle. That is attention. And attention, sustained across generations, becomes civilization. The knock in the dark revealed scale. The scale revealed capacity. Now the stone reveals discipline. And as this chapter gently closes, let your mind rest on that image. Hands steady in dim light, chisel tapping softly, dust settling. The earth responding not with collapse, but with cooperation. The impossibility of stone answered not with force, but with listening. Even on the 18th level beneath the earth, the torch still burned. How did they hack the laws of physics? As we move deeper into Derinkuyu, beyond stone and structure, we arrive at something far more fragile and yet more essential than rock: air. You can survive without light for weeks. You can ration food for months, but without breath, life fades in minutes. And yet, at a depth of 85 meters, in what is recognized as part of the 24th deepest underground city ever discovered, flames flickered steadily in chambers carved centuries ago. This was not accident, this was design. The 31 Derinkuyu ventilation system stands as one of the most astonishing achievements of underground survival in human history. Archaeologists have identified thousands of air shafts throughout the underground city, some estimates reaching as many as 15,000 narrow channels that descend vertically, connecting surface to depth. These ancient air shafts were not random holes drilled for light. They were calibrated pathways that allowed fresh oxygen to flow downward, while stale air rose upward through natural convection. The brilliance lies in simplicity. Warm air rises, cool air sinks. In Cappadocia's climate, temperature differences between surface and underground chambers created pressure gradients. The builders of Derinkuyu did not write equations for airflow, but they understood its behavior intimately. This is ancient knowledge that feels almost out of place in its sophistication. Consider the precision required. Carve a shaft too narrow and airflow becomes restricted. Carve it too wide and structural integrity weakens. Align it improperly and circulation fails. Yet even on the lowest levels, torches burned without suffocating smoke. That alone speaks to a system refined through observation and repetition. Underground survival here was not a gamble, it was engineered resilience. Imagine standing on the 18th level. The air is cool but not stale. The torch flame dances gently but does not sputter. You breathe in deeply and the air feels surprisingly clean. That sensation would have meant everything to those who sought refuge here. In times of invasion or persecution, descending into earth already required courage. To descend into suffocation would have been unbearable. Instead, they found breath. Cappadocia geology again played its part. The porous volcanic tuff allowed subtle diffusion of air through microscopic channels. But geology alone cannot sustain 20,000 people. The Derinkuyu ventilation system relied on vertical shafts that functioned like lungs. Some were connected to wells, doubling as water sources and airflow conduits. Others branched horizontally to distribute circulation evenly across levels. There is something profoundly poetic about this. A city beneath Earth breathing quietly, the planet itself becoming collaborator rather than adversary.
And this is where the viral fascination emerges. Modern audiences look at these ancient air shafts and wonder if knowledge was somehow lost. How could pre-industrial communities design a ventilation network rivaling modern underground infrastructures? But perhaps the question is inverted. It is not that they possessed secret technology, it is that they observed nature carefully. They lived close enough to wind and temperature to understand their patterns. They felt the movement of air at cave mouths. They noticed how smoke behaved in enclosed spaces. Through trial and adaptation, they refined airflow into architecture. As we continue this history for sleep reflection, let your own breathing slow. Notice the rise and fall of your chest, the gentle rhythm that sustains you without thought. Now imagine thousands of people sharing that rhythm beneath stone. The miracle of breath is not dramatic, it is quiet continuity. And in Derinkuyu, that continuity was preserved not by chance, but by ingenuity. Even at depths where sunlight never reached, oxygen traveled patiently through vertical corridors carved by hands long gone. This was not rebellion against physics, it was cooperation with it. The builders did not hack natural law, they aligned with it.
And if breath was preserved 85 meters below the earth, then Derinkuyu was not merely a shelter, it was a living organism. The 31 Derinkuyu ventilation system did not function as a single shaft or isolated mechanism. It operated as a network, a web of vertical and lateral passages that allowed air to circulate continuously through all 18 levels. Archaeologists studying these ancient air shafts have noted that many of them were positioned strategically at points where temperature differences could be maximized. Surface openings captured cooler night air, while warmer air from deeper chambers naturally rose and escaped upward. This cycle created an invisible pulse, a quiet exchange between earth and sky. Underground survival at that depth required more than luck. Imagine 20,000 people sharing enclosed spaces with livestock. Without circulation, carbon dioxide would accumulate rapidly. Smoke from oil lamps would thicken, humidity would rise. Yet the lowest chambers remained breathable. Torches burned without choking their holders. That detail alone suggests a system refined through long observation. They did not simply carve air shafts, they monitored their effects. If a corridor felt stagnant, another channel was opened. If smoke lingered too long in a gathering room, adjustments were made. Ancient engineering here was adaptive. Cappadocia geology once again provided cooperation. The porous nature of volcanic tuff allowed subtle air permeability, assisting the primary shafts in maintaining equilibrium. But the true miracle lies in scale. Thousands of shafts carved with consistency in alignment and spacing, each one a risk to structural integrity if miscalculated, each one a necessity for life. This is where the fascination intensifies. Modern observers sometimes speak of out-of-place knowledge when encountering systems that feel ahead of their time. But perhaps what feels extraordinary is simply sustained attention. The builders of Derinkuyu lived in a world where survival demanded sensitivity. They could not afford negligence. Airflow was not theoretical, it was felt in lungs, seen in flame, heard in echo. Imagine a builder descending to the 18th level, carrying a torch. He pauses, watching the flame. Does it flicker violently? Does it dim? Or does it burn steady and upright? That small detail becomes data. No laboratory required, no instruments beyond observation. Over years, even generations, these subtle readings accumulate into expertise. The Derinkuyu ventilation system thus becomes not an isolated invention, but a living tradition of refinement. There is something deeply calming in that image. Knowledge passed quietly through demonstration rather than decree. A father showing a son how to sense airflow at a shaft opening.
a craftsman explaining why this corridor must curve slightly to encourage circulation. Underground survival was communal. Everyone depended on the invisible architecture of breath. And here we touch something universal. Breath is the most democratic element of life. It belongs to all equally. In Derinkuyu, it was protected collectively. As we continue this history for sleep journey, allow your mind to rest on the simplicity of the principle. Warm air rises, cool air descends, pressure equalizes. The builders aligned their city with those laws rather than resisting them. They did not attempt to dominate physics, they listened to it. Even in crisis, there was harmony. What terrifies ancient humans enough to build a city beneath the earth? Perhaps the fear of suffocation by chaos above. Yet below, they created controlled airflow, predictable cycles, stable conditions. The surface world may have been volatile, but the underground lungs of Derinkuyu breathed steadily. That steadiness is the true miracle. Not that torches burned at 85 meters, but that they burned reliably. The miracle of breath is repetition without interruption. In darkness, continuity matters more than brilliance. And as this chapter gently closes, imagine standing once more at the lowest level. The walls cool, the air moving faintly against your skin. Somewhere above, 15,000 narrow channels connecting you to the sky. You inhale slowly. The flame remains upright. The earth does not press down in suffocation. It shelters. The builders did not hack physics, they befriended it. And in doing so, they transformed fear into respiration, stone into lung, and darkness into something quietly alive.
They did not build doors to leave. They built doors so no one could enter. As we move further into Derinkuyu, past the miracle of breath and the patience carved into stone, we encounter perhaps the most emotionally powerful feature of this underground world: the rolling stone doors. At first glance, they appear almost simple. Massive circular slabs of carved rock, some weighing up to 500 kilograms, positioned within narrow corridors. But simplicity can conceal genius. These are the 36 stone doors of Derinkuyu, among the most sophisticated ancient defense mechanisms ever integrated into subterranean architecture. Imagine standing in a dim passageway lit only by the soft tremble of oil lamps. The corridor narrows slightly, almost gently guiding movement into single file. Ahead, carved into the side wall, is a circular recess. Within it rests a thick stone disc, taller than a person. At its center is a small hole, not decorative, but functional. From the inside, a wooden beam could be inserted to push or pull the disc into place. From the outside, however, the door presented an almost impenetrable barrier. No handles, no external leverage, only smooth stone pressed tightly into a carved groove. Security in ancient times was not about iron locks or metal hinges. It was about physics and weight. When danger approached on the surface, families would descend into the city, livestock secured, grain stored, oil lamps prepared. And then, with coordinated effort, the stone door would roll into position, a low grinding sound against rock, a final shift as the disc settled into its slot. Silence. On the other side of that barrier, darkness became sanctuary. These ancient defense mechanisms were not ornamental flourishes, they were psychological architecture. To live underground for weeks required more than airflow and food. It required certainty, the certainty that those outside could not easily breach your refuge. The design was precise. Corridors were intentionally narrow so that attackers, if they discovered the entrance, would be forced to advance one at a time.
The stone door could then be rolled into place, sealing the passage. Even if intruders attempted to push from outside, the disc's weight and the carved interior lip made it nearly impossible to dislodge. Without access to the central hole and internal leverage, brute force was ineffective. Imagine the emotional shift when that door closed. The world above, chaotic and unpredictable, suddenly reduced to a distant possibility. Inside, there was order. The stone door became more than a barrier. It became reassurance. The feeling resembles what modern audiences might describe as bunker mentality. Yet here, it is not paranoia. It is preparation shaped by lived history. In a land crossed by empires and armies, security in ancient times required ingenuity rather than abundance. Cappadocia geology again provided the material. Volcanic tuff strong enough to resist fracture, yet workable enough to carve into perfectly balanced circular slabs. Each disc had to fit its corridor with minimal tolerance. Too tight, and it could not move. Too loose, and it would fail to seal. This level of craftsmanship speaks of repetition and refinement. It suggests that the builders had closed these doors before, that the sound of stone sliding into place was not unfamiliar. As we continue this history for sleep journey, let yourself imagine sitting behind one of these sealed corridors. The air cool, the flicker of light reflecting off curved stone, the heavy silence beyond the barrier. There is something profoundly calming about a door that cannot be forced from the outside. Safety here was not abstract, it was tactile. You could touch it, lean against it, trust it. And in that trust, fear softened. The paradox of Derinkuyu deepens once more. What terrified ancient humans enough to build such doors? Perhaps not merely invasion, but vulnerability. The awareness that walls alone are not enough, that entry points must be controlled. And so they engineered closure, not to imprison themselves, but to protect continuity. The rolling door was not a symbol of isolation, it was a symbol of collective survival.
And once the stone door settled into its groove, something profound happened. The sound outside no longer mattered. The world narrowed, not in fear, but in focus. These 36 stone doors in Derinkuyu were more than slabs of rock. They were thresholds between chaos and control. To understand their emotional power, imagine the final moments before sealing the passage. Footsteps echo faintly above ground, rumors of approaching riders, a signal passed quietly from chamber to chamber, oil lamps trimmed, livestock gathered closer, then hands press against stone, muscles strain. The circular disc rolls slowly, deliberately into position. The ancient defense mechanisms engage without metal, without hinges, without mechanical noise, just gravity and design. When the door locks into place from the inside, it creates not only a barrier, but a transformation of space. On one side is uncertainty, on the other, deliberate stillness. Security in ancient times was rarely absolute. Most fortifications could be breached with time and force. But Derinkuyu's rolling doors were uniquely defensive because they inverted vulnerability. The door did not swing outward, it sealed inward. Only those inside possessed the leverage to move it. Attackers confronted a smooth, circular surface embedded within carved stone, impossible to grip effectively. Even if they managed to push against it, the weight distribution worked against them. The deeper the pressure, the more firmly it wedged into place. This is ancient engineering shaped by lived threat. The builders understood that narrow corridors amplified defense. A single guard could monitor an approach. A single stone disc could block an entire level.
Some doors were positioned at transitional points between major chambers, creating layers of protection. If one barrier failed, another waited beyond. Underground survival here was layered psychologically as well as physically. Imagine children sleeping behind these sealed passages, the thick stone muting distant vibrations, the air flowing steadily through ancient air shafts untouched by the tension outside. In the quiet of those chambers, the rolling door became a promise, not that danger would disappear, but that it would not easily reach them. There is something deeply resonant in that image for modern listeners. We build locks and alarm systems. We close doors at night. We seek the same assurance of controlled space. The bunker mentality often associated with underground shelters today is sometimes framed negatively, but in Derinkuyu it was communal resilience. Safety was shared. The act of sealing the door was collective. No individual alone could move a 500-kilogram stone disc. It required cooperation. That cooperation itself reinforced trust. Cappadocia geology again shaped possibility. The volcanic tuff allowed the creation of circular slabs thick enough to withstand battering, yet balanced enough to roll along carved channels. Precision grooves guided movement. A small internal cavity allowed a beam to be inserted for leverage. These details reveal iterative design. Perhaps earlier versions cracked or jammed. Perhaps adjustments were made across generations. The result we see today is the refinement of experience. And as we continue this history for sleep meditation, let your mind rest on the sensation of enclosure, not as confinement, but as sanctuary. The corridor beyond the door fades into silence. The stone surface cool beneath your palm. The knowledge that entry points are controlled. The paradox of Derinkuyu echoes once more. What terrified ancient humans enough to build this? Perhaps the unpredictability of open horizons, the vulnerability of wide plains. Above ground, space is massed and exposure is constant. Below ground, space is deliberate and defined. The rolling doors converted fear into boundary. They turned threat into architecture. Even centuries later, archaeologists pushing against these discs from the outside found them stubborn, immovable without internal access. That physical reality speaks across time. The builders anticipated force and designed against it, not with aggression, but with weight, not with weapons, but with geometry. And so, as this chapter gently closes, imagine the final scene. The heavy stone disc fully sealed, lamps glowing softly in protected chambers, breath steady, conversations hushed but calm. Above may uncertainty roam, below security rests in stone. The door does not imprison, it reassures. In Derinkuyu, survival was not frantic resistance, it was quiet control.
What must you fear so deeply that you would choose eternal darkness over the sight of the sun? As we sit behind the sealed stone doors of Derinkuyu, breathing steadily in chambers carved with patience, the question begins to echo more insistently. Who built Derinkuyu, and what terror drove them beneath the earth? The answer is not simple, and perhaps that is why the mystery endures. Archaeologists continue to debate who built Derinkuyu, tracing its earliest layers back to the Phrygians around the 8th century BCE, though some speculate even earlier origins. Later, during the Roman period and into the Byzantine era, Christian communities are believed to have expanded the city. Each generation left its mark. Each layer suggests a response to something. Cappadocia has long been a crossroads of empires. The Hittites once dominated Anatolia with chariots and fortified cities. Later came Persians, Greeks under Alexander, Romans, Byzantines, and waves of invading forces that transformed the region repeatedly. Ancient wars were not abstract events here, they were lived disruptions. Fields burned, livestock seized, settlements looted. In such a landscape, the idea of underground survival becomes less eccentric and more logical. But Derinkuyu feels larger than a temporary wartime shelter. It suggests fear sustained across generations. Consider the early Christians under Roman rule. Periods of persecution, though often exaggerated in popular imagination, were real in certain regions and times. To practice faith quietly beneath the surface offered protection from surveillance. Underground chapels carved into stone hint at spiritual continuity preserved in darkness. Later still, during the Arab-Byzantine wars of the 7th and 8th centuries, Cappadocia became a frontier zone. Raids were frequent, villages vulnerable. The need for rapid, defensible refuge would have been acute. Yet none of these explanations alone fully account for the scale. Derinkuyu is not a small hideout, it is a city engineered for extended habitation, which leads to a deeper reflection. Perhaps the terror was not a single enemy, but instability itself. Imagine living in a region where borders shift repeatedly, where one generation swears allegiance to one empire and the next to another, where rumors of approaching armies travel faster than certainty. In such an environment, building downward is not simply defense, it is psychological anchoring. The surface world becomes unpredictable, but beneath there is control. And so the paradox intensifies. They accepted darkness, but not helplessness. They traded sunlight for sovereignty. As we continue this history for sleep meditation, allow yourself to imagine the emotional weight of that decision, to descend willingly, to know that weeks may pass without direct sunlight, to hear distant echoes above and trust that the stone doors and ancient air shafts will hold. Fear, when it reaches a certain threshold, reshapes behavior. It reshapes architecture. But fear also sharpens intelligence. Derinkuyu does not feel like panic carved in haste. It feels like strategy carved in stone. And this is why the question remains so compelling. Who built Derinkuyu? Was it the Hittites refining early shelters, Phrygians expanding cavities, Byzantine Christians fortifying against raids? The city's walls do not speak clearly. They carry traces of multiple eras. The terror that drove them down may have changed names across centuries, yet the response remained consistent: downward, inward, together.
And yet, even as we trace layers of occupation and conflict, something in Derinkuyu resists a single narrative. The question of who built Derinkuyu does not end with names of empires. It lingers in the atmosphere of the chambers themselves. Because if this city were carved only for one war, it would not have required such depth, such redundancy, such endurance. The 52 ancient wars that swept across Anatolia were brutal, yes. The 52 Arab-Byzantine wars transformed Cappadocia into a contested frontier. But invasions come and pass. Derinkuyu feels prepared for something more cyclical, more persistent than a single campaign. Imagine a community hearing distant rumors again, riders seen at the horizon, smoke from a neighboring village. This was not the first time, nor the last. The terror that drove them down may have been cumulative memory, trauma passed quietly through generations. Grandparents telling children how quickly fields can be lost, how swiftly banners change. When instability becomes pattern, survival becomes architecture. And so perhaps Derinkuyu is less about a specific enemy
and more about uncertainty itself. Climate shifts may also have played a role. Anatolia has experienced drought cycles and environmental fluctuations. A prolonged scarcity could push communities to store grain underground, where temperature remains stable. Volcanic tuff maintains coolness even during harsh summers. In that sense, underground survival offered protection not only from armies, but from hunger. The earth insulated both against swords and seasons. There is also the possibility that early phases of Derinkuyu predate the Roman and Byzantine expansions entirely. Some scholars speculate Hittite-era foundations, though evidence remains debated. If true, then the impulse to carve downward may have originated in Bronze Age turbulence, trade routes disrupted, regional conflicts escalating, each period adding corridors and chambers, expanding the network as fear evolved. This layered construction deepens the paradox. The terror that drove them down did not vanish after 1 century. It returned in new forms, and the city adapted. The mystery remains unresolved, and perhaps that is precisely why it continues to fascinate modern audiences. We are drawn to unsolved questions. We ask in comment sections and academic journals alike, who truly built Derinkuyu? Was it a single cultural group or many? Did faith drive expansion or fear of empire? Was it strategic military design or communal improvisation refined over centuries? The silence of stone refuses certainty, and that silence invites contemplation rather than conclusion. As we continue this history for sleep reflection, allow the ambiguity to settle gently rather than demand resolution. Fear in ancient times was rarely singular. It was layered like the city itself. Political instability, religious tension, economic disruption, environmental change. Each factor alone may not explain Derinkuyu, but together they form atmosphere. The atmosphere of a world where permanence felt fragile. What terrifies humans enough to abandon sunlight? Perhaps not one overwhelming catastrophe, but the erosion of trust and stability. The realization that the surface cannot always be relied upon. In that realization, the underground becomes sanctuary. Not because darkness is preferable, but because predictability is. The stone doors, the ancient air shafts, the carefully carved pillars all point toward the same psychological truth. They were not fleeing existence, they were preserving it. And as you rest now with the question still open, imagine the final descent during one such crisis. Families moving downward calmly, not in panic but in practiced sequence. The rolling door ceiling above, the Derinkuyu ventilation system humming invisibly through shafts, the earth enclosing them not as tomb but as refuge. Above ground, history may have shifted violently. Below ground, continuity endured. And perhaps that is the final layer of this paradox. The terror that drove them down was powerful enough to reshape landscape, yet it did not extinguish community. Instead, it concentrated it. In darkness, they remained together.
This was not a city. It was an underground nation. Just when Derinkuyu begins to feel comprehensible, when we believe we have measured its depth, its ventilation, its rolling stone doors, another revelation shifts the ground beneath us. Derinkuyu was not alone in the dark. Across Cappadocia, more than 200 subterranean settlements have been identified, forming what scholars describe as a vast Cappadocia underground network. Some are modest, others rival Derinkuyu in complexity, and some, like 58 Kaymakli underground city and 57 Ozkonak, reveal architectural parallels so striking that they feel like chapters in the same hidden book.
Imagine standing at the lowest chamber of Derinkuyu and realizing that miles away, beneath another quiet village, another community once carved its own descending refuge. The earth beneath Cappadocia is not empty. It is threaded with memory. Kaymakli underground city, only a few kilometers from Derinkuyu, descends multiple levels into volcanic tuff, featuring similar rolling stone doors, storage chambers, and ventilation shafts. Archaeological studies suggest that narrow tunnels once connected parts of these cities, some stretching several kilometers underground. The idea transforms our perception. We are no longer observing isolated survival architecture. We are witnessing a coordinated response to instability across a region. The Cappadocia underground network implies shared knowledge, shared technique, perhaps even shared communication between communities. Imagine a messenger moving quietly through hidden tunnels, carrying news from one underground city to another. The surface world above might appear fragmented by geography and empire, but below, continuity flowed through stone corridors. This is the plot twist that reshapes the entire narrative. Derinkuyu was not an anomaly born of singular terror. It was part of a broader cultural adaptation. Multiple settlements chose downward expansion. Multiple generations refined ancient construction methods beneath the same volcanic landscape. Cappadocia geology once again provided the medium, but human intention multiplied it. Volcanic, for example, reveals additional defensive innovations. Narrow, vertical holes drilled above corridors may have allowed defenders to pour oil or drop projectiles on intruders. Kaymakli underground city displays complex livestock areas and communal spaces that mirror Derinkuyu's structure. The repetition suggests pattern, not coincidence. As we continue this history for sleep reflection, let the sense of scale expand gently rather than overwhelm. Picture the Cappadocian plateau under starlight. Quiet fields, modest stone houses. Beneath them, a second geography unfolds. Chambers beneath chambers, corridors weaving through darkness, entire populations prepared to descend when necessary. The underground network was not merely defensive, it was relational. Communities likely knew of one another's existence. The knowledge of refuge was collective, and there is something deeply moving in that realization. Fear did not isolate them, it connected them. The earth became shared infrastructure. When the rolling doors closed in Derinkuyu, similar doors may have sealed in Kaymakli and Volcanic. Separate entrances, shared instinct. This interconnectedness intensifies the paradox. What terrified ancient humans enough to create not one refuge, but hundreds? The answer may lie in repetition of crisis across centuries. Instability that did not fade, but cycled. Raids that returned. Political upheavals that re-emerged. In response, architecture scaled regionally. The underground nation was not declared, it was carved quietly over generations.
And once you accept that Derinkuyu was part of a vast 22 Cappadocia underground network, the emotional landscape shifts once again. The darkness no longer feels isolated, it feels populated. Beneath the quiet hills of central Anatolia, entire communities once shared a hidden geography that paralleled the visible world above. The existence of 58 Kaymakli underground city and 57 Volcanic is not simply archaeological trivia. It is evidence of regional adaptation on a scale that borders on astonishing. Kaymakli underground city, with its layered chambers and complex storage areas, mirrors Derinkuyu in both structure and intention. Volcanic, carved with defensive shafts and communication channels, adds further sophistication. Each site reveals variations, but the underlying philosophy remains consistent. Descend when threatened, seal when necessary, survive together. Some tunnels believed to connect Derinkuyu and Kaymakli stretch for kilometers, though many passages remain partially collapsed or inaccessible. Even if not fully interconnected in a single continuous system, the conceptual network was undeniable. Knowledge moved between villages, techniques evolved collectively. Ancient construction methods became shared heritage rather than isolated innovation. The Cappadocia underground network was not a secret conspiracy, it was cultural memory carved into stone. Imagine the psychological comfort this would have offered. If one settlement was discovered or compromised, another lay within reachable distance. The earth beneath Cappadocia became layered with contingency. Above ground, borders shifted with empire. Below ground, stability endured across generations. This realization reframes the entire narrative of Derinkuyu. The terror that drove them down did not paralyze them into isolation. It prompted collaboration. It fostered architectural conversation across communities. The empathetic volcanic rock architecture of the region became a shared language. Builders in Kaymakli likely understood the logic of Derinkuyu's rolling doors. Craftsmen in Volcanic refined defensive choke points in response to similar threats. Underground survival was no longer a single response, it was a regional strategy. And here lies the unexpected plot twist. When modern audiences encounter Derinkuyu, they often imagine a singular, almost mythical city. But the truth is more expansive and more human. This was not an anomaly born from one moment of crisis. It was an ecosystem of resilience. More than 200 underground sites across Cappadocia suggest that the impulse to descend became normalized. Children growing up in these villages would have known of the passages beneath. They may have explored shallow chambers in times of peace, learning routes instinctively. When crisis came, descent was not unfamiliar, it was rehearsed. As we continue this history for sleep meditation, let your imagination expand horizontally as well as vertically. Picture not just one inverted skyscraper beneath a single house, but a constellation of hidden cities spread across the plateau. Each with its own entrances concealed in courtyards, beneath kitchens, within barns. Each with rolling stone doors waiting silently. Each with ancient air shafts breathing faintly toward the sky. The paradox deepens beautifully. What terrified ancient humans enough to create an underground nation? Perhaps not just enemies, but repetition of vulnerability. A recognition that peace is temporary. A determination that continuity must be engineered rather than assumed. The Cappadocia underground network suggests something profound about human adaptation. When fear becomes shared, so too does innovation. When danger becomes cyclical, preparation becomes tradition. Even centuries later, archaeologists mapping these subterranean complexes speak of surprise at the consistency of design principles. The same narrow corridors, the same circular stone doors, the same ventilation logic. Across miles of terrain, beneath multiple settlements, a coherent architectural philosophy persisted. That coherence hints at communication, at apprenticeship networks, at generational instruction. In darkness, knowledge traveled. And so, as this chapter settles gently into silence, imagine standing above the Cappadocian plain at dusk, the sky wide and open, the land appearing ordinary. Beneath your feet, however, lies a second country carved from volcanic tuff, not declared on any map, not governed by crown or emperor, but sustained by collective will. Derinkuyu was never alone in the dark.
It belonged to something larger, and in that realization, the story grows quieter, deeper, and infinitely more human. They were born, they grew up, they loved, and they died without needing to know how the seasons changed above the soil. After all the speculation about wars, invasions, and terror, a quieter truth waits in the chambers of Derinkuyu. Life continued, not as a temporary hiding place alone, but as a fully functioning world beneath the earth. When we speak of daily life in underground city environments like this, we must let go of the idea of constant panic. Survival was not only defensive, it was domestic. Imagine the flicker of torchlight along a carved corridor at dawn. Not sunlight, but a steady glow reflected on volcanic tough walls. Somewhere in the upper levels, grain is being ground between stone wheels. The rhythmic scraping echoes softly through narrow passageways. Further below, a press is turning slowly, extracting oil from olives stored in cool chambers. 53 ancient winemaking was not abandoned underground. Archaeologists have identified pressing rooms and storage jars, suggesting that grapes harvested on the surface were carried below and transformed in safety. Wine, after all, was more than drink. It was ritual, medicine, community. To continue producing it beneath the earth was an act of cultural preservation. Nearby, livestock rest in designated stalls. Ventilation shafts carry away odors, maintaining breathable air even in enclosed spaces. The Derinkuyu ventilation system that once seemed miraculous for survival now reveals itself as infrastructure for routine life. In carved rooms that scholars identify as 50 underground churches, walls bear faint traces of niches and altars. Faith did not remain on the surface, it descended with the people. In moments of fear, prayer likely echoed against stone, but in moments of calm, so did hymns, baptisms, and quiet ceremonies marking birth and marriage. There were also communal spaces that may have functioned as schools. Children learning letters by torchlight, parents teaching stories of ancestors, perhaps explaining why the underground nation existed at all. Daily life in underground city environments required adaptation of rhythm. Without direct sunlight, time would be measured differently. Through routine, through scheduled tasks, through communal agreement about when to sleep and wake. The absence of sky did not eliminate order, it intensified intentionality. Imagine a young couple carving out private moments in a small chamber, laughter hushed but genuine. Imagine elders seated against cool stone, sharing memories of earlier conflicts that had driven them below. The surface seasons continued in silence above them. Harvests rose and fell, armies marched and retreated, but underground continuity prevailed. The genius of Derinkuyu lies not only in its defensive mechanisms, but in its capacity to host ordinary existence. The pressing of oil, the fermentation of wine, the care of animals, the whisper of prayer in underground churches. This was not merely bunker mentality, it was resilience transformed into routine. The deeper we descend into this chapter of history for sleep, the clearer it becomes that fear alone cannot sustain a civilization. Structure must support dignity, architecture must allow for joy, and so Derinkuyu was designed not only to protect life, but to make life livable.
And if we linger a little longer in this hidden world, we begin to understand something even more profound. Daily life in underground city environments like Derinkuyu was not a suspension of humanity. It was its quiet affirmation. The absence of sunlight did not erase identity, it reshaped it. Think of a child born during one of these extended descents. Their first memories might not be of blue sky,
but of warm torchlight flickering against carved stone, the smell of pressed olives, the gentle murmur of adults speaking in low voices to conserve calm. For that child, the underground was not a prison, it was home. In chambers identified as storage rooms, massive clay jars once held grain and wine. Ancient winemaking techniques continued with patient precision. Grapes harvested quickly during windows of safety were brought below and crushed in carved basins. Fermentation unfolded in cool, stable temperatures that volcanic tuff naturally provided. In a strange way, the earth improved preservation. Oil pressed from olives flowed into containers, sustaining lamps that extended daylight artificially. Light became something crafted rather than granted. The rhythm of underground survival required cooperation at every level. Someone tended animals in carved stalls, ensuring milk and meat remained available. Someone oversaw ventilation shafts, making certain the Derinkuyu ventilation system remained unobstructed. Someone prepared meals in communal kitchens, where soot-darkened ceilings absorbed years of cooking fires. And somewhere in the quieter chambers marked as 50 underground churches, belief continued to breathe. It is difficult to overstate the psychological resilience required to maintain faith beneath layers of stone. To gather in prayer when the sky cannot be seen is to declare that hope is not dependent on horizon. Baptisms likely occurred in shallow carved basins. Weddings perhaps whispered beneath archways shaped by hand tools. Funerals conducted in solemn stillness, the earth itself already surrounding them. The paradox deepens here. We often associate resilience with dramatic survival against immediate threat, but the greater resilience lies in sustaining normalcy, teaching children letters, sharing stories, preserving music, maintaining ritual. Daily life in underground city settings was not a rejection of the surface world. It was preparation to return to it intact. Families likely rotated periods above and below ground, depending on danger. Crops were still planted when possible. Trade may have resumed between crises. Yet the underground infrastructure ensured that interruption would not equal collapse. As we continue this history for sleep meditation, allow yourself to imagine the sensory details softly. The coolness of stone walls beneath fingertips, the steady hum of air descending through ancient shafts, the glow of oil lamps reflecting in a child's eyes, laughter echoing gently along corridors. Even in darkness, community generated warmth. And perhaps this is the most moving revelation of Derinkuyu. The terror that drove them down did not strip them of tenderness. It refined their interdependence. It required them to trust one another in confined spaces, to coordinate routines, to share limited resources, to endure proximity without fracturing. In modern terms, we might call it collective resilience. In ancient terms, it was simply survival woven with dignity. When archaeologists today walk through Derinkuyu and Kaymakli underground city, they observe storage rooms, wine presses, chapels, and animal stalls. But what cannot be fully excavated is the emotional life that filled those rooms. The whispered reassurances, the quiet romances, the lullabies sung in echoing chambers. Life without sun was not life without meaning. And as this chapter settles into stillness, imagine the moment when danger passed and the stone doors rolled aside. Families ascending slowly toward light, blinking at the sky.
carrying with them jars of preserved wine, tools carefully stored, traditions unbroken. The underground had not erased them, it had preserved them. That is the quiet miracle beneath Cappadocia. Not only ancient engineering, not only underground churches or ancient winemaking, but the stubborn persistence of humanity itself.
Perhaps that is why you like to pull the blanket over your head when you sleep. The instinct to return to the cave may still live quietly in your genes. After walking through the vast chambers of Derinkuyu, after imagining the rolling stone doors and the underground churches glowing in torchlight, we arrive at something more intimate, the psychology of shelter, the cave instinct. The question is no longer only what terrified ancient humans enough to carve a nation underground, but why such spaces also feel strangely comforting to us today. The paradox deepens. Darkness can signal danger, yet enclosed darkness can also signal safety. Evolutionary psychologists suggest that early human survival depended on finding environments that offered both concealment and controlled access. A cave with a narrow entrance allowed monitoring of threats, while protecting from wind, predators, and hostile tribes. The psychology of shelter formed long before cities existed. It shaped how our nervous systems respond to space. When you sit in a small room with dim lighting, when rain falls outside and you feel protected indoors, something ancient relaxes. This is not weakness. It is pattern recognition embedded in biology. Why we like small spaces may be tied to this ancestral calibration. Large open plains exposed our ancestors to vulnerability. Enclosed spaces reduced unpredictability. Derinkuyu, in this sense, was not only a strategic response to invasion, it resonated with deep neurological wiring. The cave instinct did not emerge in Cappadocia. It traveled with humanity from prehistoric migrations. The volcanic rock architecture of Derinkuyu simply amplified a primal preference. Narrow corridors limit angles of threat. Thick stone walls dampen sound from outside chaos. Even today, modern architecture sometimes mirrors this impulse. Storm shelters, basements, attics, reading nooks. Spaces designed to feel enclosed rather than exposed. The psychology of shelter intersects with the experience of control. When the external world feels unstable, the ability to retreat into a smaller, defined environment restores equilibrium. During times of war, famine, or political upheaval, the underground city offered more than physical protection. It offered cognitive containment. Predictable walls, known boundaries, measurable corridors. In a surface world governed by shifting empires and 52 ancient wars, the underground provided spatial certainty. And this may be why Derinkuyu does not feel purely alien to modern viewers. Even in our technologically advanced age, many people describe a sense of relief when descending into quiet, enclosed spaces. Think of libraries with low ceilings. Think of small cabins in the forest. Think of the gentle hush inside a tent during a storm. The cave instinct whispers that enclosure can equal security. As we continue this history for sleep reflection, allow your own body to respond softly. Notice how dim light slows your breathing. Notice how walls around you reduce sensory overload. The psychology of shelter is not about hiding from life. It is about regulating exposure. Derinkuyu may have been born from terror, but it functioned through familiarity. The underground did not fight human instinct. It aligned with it.
That alignment is perhaps the quiet key to understanding how thousands could remain below for extended periods. They were not only escaping threat, they were returning to a spatial language their species understood.
And if we follow that instinct a little further, the paradox becomes almost tender. The cave instinct is not only about protection from predators or invaders, it is about relief from overwhelm. The surface world is vast, unpredictable, filled with horizons we cannot fully control. The underground narrows the field. It reduces variables. It quiets the noise. In the psychology of shelter, enclosure does not necessarily mean confinement. It can mean containment. There is a difference. Confinement traps. Containment holds. Derinkuyu functioned as containment. Within its carved walls, uncertainty could be measured. Corridors were known. Rooms were familiar. Light sources were finite and manageable. In a time shaped by 52 ancient wars and shifting empires, such spatial predictability would have calmed the nervous system. Modern neuroscience offers language for what ancient builders likely felt intuitively. Our brains are constantly scanning for threat. Wide open spaces demand vigilance. Enclosed, controlled environments reduce cognitive load. This may explain why we instinctively create small sanctuaries, even in modern homes. A bedroom corner, a reading nook, a blanket wrapped tightly around the body. Why we like small spaces is not regression, it is regulation. Derinkuyu amplified this principle across an entire community. Thousands of individuals sharing enclosed chambers may sound claustrophobic to us at first, but within the psychology of shelter, shared enclosure can generate collective calm. When everyone descends together, fear becomes distributed rather than isolated. When routines are maintained beneath stone, anxiety becomes structured rather than chaotic. The underground churches, the wine presses, the livestock stalls, all contributed to this psychological architecture. Life remained patterned. Pattern reduces panic. The cave instinct whispers that safety is not always found in openness. Sometimes it is found in limitation, in defined walls, in ceilings close enough to touch, in air that circulates predictably through ancient shafts. The Derinkuyu ventilation system was not only engineering brilliance, it was reassurance embodied in stone. Fresh air at 85 meters below the earth signaled continuity. Even in darkness, breath remained steady. This connection between breath and shelter is deeply human. When we feel anxious, we seek smaller spaces. When children are frightened, they hide under beds or inside closets, not because those places are objectively stronger, but because enclosure narrows threat perception. Derinkuyu scaled that childhood instinct into architecture. And here lies the most relatable layer of the story. What terrified ancient humans enough to build this? Perhaps not only armies or climate shifts, but the exhaustion of unpredictability, the desire for pause, the longing for a place where chaos cannot easily penetrate. In our own lives, we may not carve cities into volcanic tuff, yet we replicate the impulse. We dim the lights, we close the door, we wrap ourselves in blankets, we create psychological caves. As this history for sleep journey continues, let that recognition soften your breathing. The underground nation beneath Cappadocia was not merely a reaction to danger, it was a sanctuary shaped by ancient neural wisdom. The psychology of shelter reveals that resilience is not always about standing in the open. Sometimes it is about knowing when to descend.
And as you imagine the families of Derinkuyu resting in carved chambers, their oil lamps glowing softly, understand that the cave instinct has never disappeared. It lives quietly in the way you seek comfort before sleep, in the way you close your eyes and allow the world to narrow gently. Derinkuyu may be carved from volcanic rock, but its deeper architecture is carved into us.
It was a structure without a chief architect, guided not by a single ruler's vision, but by shared fear as its blueprint. When we look at Derinkuyu through the lens of 63 History of Cappadocia, something remarkable emerges. This underground city was not carved in one dramatic burst of engineering. It unfolded across centuries. It absorbed the touch of different hands, different empires, different prayers whispered in different languages. The paradox grows quieter and deeper here. Derinkuyu was not the product of one civilization reacting to one crisis. It was an inheritance shaped by generations of builders responding to recurring instability. Scholars suggest that the earliest phases may trace back to the Phrygians, who understood the softness of volcanic tuff and its defensive potential. Later, during Persian influence in Hellenistic periods, the tunnels may have been expanded or adapted. By the time early Christians sought refuge from persecution and later from the turbulence of the Arab-Byzantine frontier, the underground infrastructure already existed. It did not need to be invented, it needed to be deepened. This layering aligns with the broader 55 ancient civilizations timeline of Anatolia, where cultures did not simply replace one another, but overlapped, absorbed, and transformed. Derinkuyu became a palimpsest carved in stone. Each generation inherited corridors already dug, ventilation shafts already breathing, rolling doors already set into grooves. And instead of dismantling the past, they extended it. Imagine a father guiding his child through a half-finished chamber, explaining where the next tunnel should curve to preserve structural integrity. Not with blueprints on parchment, but with memory and observation. The knowledge of volcanic rock architecture was passed down not through formal academies, but through apprenticeship and repetition. This continuity is perhaps the most astonishing element of Derinkuyu. Fear may have initiated excavation, but continuity sustained expansion. Generations of builders added depth incrementally. One corridor extended a few meters further, one new storage chamber carved beside an older one additional air shaft drilled to ensure circulation. Over centuries, these incremental acts accumulated into a city capable of housing tens of thousands. No single moment defines Derinkuyu. Its grandeur lies in patience, in the refusal of communities to abandon what earlier hands had begun. In this sense, Derinkuyu mirrors the broader history of Cappadocia itself. Empires rose and fell on the surface. Phrygians, Persians, Romans, Byzantines. Each left cultural imprints above ground. But below ground, the infrastructure of survival endured. The underground nation did not pledge loyalty to one flag. It pledged loyalty to continuity. And this continuity reframes the entire paradox. What terrified ancient humans enough to build this? Perhaps not only immediate danger, but the recognition that instability is cyclical. If fear returns generation after generation, preparation must also become generational. As we continue this history for sleep meditation, let the image of continuity settle softly. Picture torchlight illuminating tool marks left by ancestors centuries earlier. Picture a young builder running his fingers along grooves carved long before his birth, feeling the texture of inherited caution. Derinkuyu was not completed, it was continued.
And when we widen the lens even further, Derinkuyu begins to feel less like a structure and more like a living timeline carved into earth. Within the broader 63 history of Cappadocia, civilizations did not simply conquer and vanish. They overlapped, they inherited, they adapted. The underground city stands as a quiet testament to that continuity. The Phrygians may have initiated early excavations, understanding how volcanic tuff could be shaped without collapsing. Persian administrators may have recognized its strategic value. Later Christian communities, facing persecution or frontier instability, expanded chambers and carved additional 50 underground churches into stone. Each culture left subtle fingerprints, yet none claimed sole authorship. This is what makes Derinkuyu so profoundly human. It does not glorify a single ruler or monumental moment. It reflects generations of builders who never expected their work to be admired centuries later. They carved for survival, not legacy, and yet legacy is precisely what emerged. In the 55 ancient civilizations timeline of Anatolia, power shifted repeatedly. Empires rose with ceremony and fell with violence. Capitals moved, languages evolved. But beneath the political transformations, Derinkuyu endured as infrastructure. It did not align itself with ideology, it aligned itself with necessity. The paradox becomes almost poetic. A city without a chief architect outlasted the blueprints of empires. Shared fear became shared design. Shared memory became structural reinforcement. Imagine a builder centuries after the first excavation, descending into a passage already smoothed by countless hands. He does not question its origin. He trusts it. He extends it. The knowledge embedded in the walls becomes cultural inheritance. Continuity does not require central planning when it is rooted in repetition and shared purpose. This generational layering also explains the refinement visible in later phases. Corridors become more symmetrical, ventilation shafts more strategically aligned, defensive features more deliberate. Each generation learned from the previous one, not through formal documentation, but through lived experience. The underground city became a classroom of stone. And this slow accumulation of skill reveals something vital about resilience. It is rarely explosive. It is incremental. It grows through quiet persistence. As we continue this history for sleep reflection, let the idea of generational patience settle gently in your thoughts. Derinkuyu did not emerge from a single act of desperation. It expanded because each era recognized that instability might return. The cave instinct combined with historical memory to form architectural tradition. Fear was no longer reactive, it became proactive. Preparedness became culture. And perhaps this is why Derinkuyu resonates so deeply with modern audiences. We too live within long timelines. We inherit structures we did not design. We adapt systems built by those before us. The underground nation beneath Cappadocia mirrors that universal pattern. We are always continuing something older than ourselves. The generations of builders who shaped Derinkuyu likely never imagined satellite imagery or archaeological surveys revealing their corridors to the world. They did not carve for fame, they carved for continuity, and in doing so, they left behind more than chambers and tunnels. They left a lesson embedded in volcanic rock architecture, that resilience can be cumulative, that safety can be constructed slowly, that fear, when shared, can transform into collaboration across centuries. As this chapter settles into quiet reflection, picture torchlight illuminating inscriptions left by different eras. Imagine languages layered in whispers across stone. A Persian trader, a Christian monk, a Byzantine villager, each adding depth, not erasing the previous layer.
Derinkuyu is not only an underground city, it is a timeline made tangible. And in that timeline, we find perhaps the most enduring answer to the paradox. What terrified ancient humans enough to build this? The awareness that history does not stop. And so, they prepared for it.
When the torches go out, the darkness here is not frightening. It is the softest protective blanket in history. After descending through centuries of fear, engineering, faith, and resilience, we arrive at stillness. Derinkuyu today rests in silence beneath Cappadocia, its corridors no longer filled with footsteps, its underground churches no longer echoing with whispered prayers. And yet that silence does not feel empty, it feels complete. The paradox that guided this journey now settles gently. What terrified ancient humans enough to build this? Perhaps the more enduring question is what sustained them once it was built. The answer lies not in panic, but in patience, not in chaos, but in continuity. Derinkuyu stands as stone testimony to human adaptability. Within the broader 63 history of Cappadocia, empires have dissolved, borders have shifted, languages have faded, but the carved chambers remain. They do not shout, they do not glorify conquest, they simply endure. In the quiet of these tunnels, we sense something profoundly calming. The earth above continues its cycles, seasons change, winds cross the plateau, yet beneath it all, the underground nation rests undisturbed. This is where 57 sleep meditation history meets archaeology. The weight of volcanic rock becomes symbolic rather than oppressive. The thickness of stone walls becomes reassurance. Even modern visitors walking through Derinkuyu describe a surprising sense of tranquility. The air is cool, the light dim but steady, sound softened by layers of earth. It resembles the atmosphere of a calming history documentary brought to life, where narration slows and breath deepens. In that environment, the mind naturally quiets. Perhaps that is the final gift of Derinkuyu. It teaches us that survival need not always be dramatic. It can be methodical, it can be shared, it can be patient across generations of builders who never met one another but trusted the same instinct. The cave instinct, the psychology of shelter, the continuity of civilizations all converge into this stillness. The underground city is no longer a refuge from invaders, it is a refuge from noise. As this 59 ASMR history journey draws toward its close, imagine standing at the entrance of Derinkuyu at dusk. The sky above Cappadocia glows faintly. The earth below holds centuries of memory. You do not need to descend further. You simply acknowledge its presence. The silence of stone does not demand answers. It offers perspective. Fear carved the first tunnel. Hope carved the next. Continuity carved the rest. And now, only calm remains.
And now, as the final echoes of footsteps fade from these imagined corridors, we allow the silence to do what it has always done best. It holds, it softens, it protects. Derinkuyu no longer needs to defend anyone from invasion or uncertainty. Its stone doors remain open for visitors, its tunnels lit gently for exploration. Yet beneath that accessibility, something ancient still lingers. The memory of collective breath in enclosed space. The reassurance of walls carved by careful hands. The steady rhythm of life that once unfolded beneath 85 meters of earth. This is where history transforms into stillness, not as spectacle, but as sanctuary. Within the broader narrative of this 57 sleep meditation history, Derinkuyu becomes less a mystery to solve and more a presence to feel. The carved volcanic rock architecture does not compete with monuments above ground. It does not tower toward the sky. Instead, it descends. It invites inward reflection. The paradox that guided our entire journey now rests without urgency. What terrified ancient humans enough to build this? The answer is layered, complex, and perhaps unknowable in full. But the outcome is clear. They built not only for fear, they built for continuity. They built for children who would one day run their fingers along cool stone walls. They built for nights when uncertainty pressed close. They built so that darkness could become gentler. And here, in the quiet conclusion of this 52 calming history documentary, woven with 59 ASMR history tones, we recognize something deeply comforting. Darkness is not inherently hostile. In the right context, it is restorative. Think of the way night wraps around a village, the way stars appear only when daylight recedes. The underground city beneath Cappadocia mirrors that cycle. When the surface world grew too bright with conflict, they stepped into dimness to preserve clarity. When noise became overwhelming, they chose containment. There is wisdom in that choice. Even now, you may feel it as you listen. The gentle narrowing of attention, the comfort of enclosure, the slow release of vigilance. The psychology of shelter that once guided ancient builders continues quietly within you. And as we bring this history for sleep reflection to its final moments, imagine the underground city once more, not as a site of fear, but as a cradle of endurance. The air cool and steady, the stone warm with memory, the corridors empty yet full of story. Above, Cappadocia sleeps beneath a wide sky. Below, Derinkuyu rests in dignified silence. The torches are out. The doors stand open. The generations of builders have long since returned to dust, but their intention remains carved into earth, to protect, to preserve, to prepare. Let that intention settle gently into your own breath. You are safe. The walls around you, whether stone or imagination, hold you. The world beyond can continue its restless turning. For now, you descend into rest. Derinkuyu has no final proclamation. It offers no triumphant conclusion, only the quiet certainty that humanity has always known how to endure. And in that certainty, the darkness becomes soft.